Cahill, president of World Doctors Alliance and World Freedom Alliance. This will stop the lockdown worldwide. The following are the highlights, then the full interview.
But this will actually stop the lockdown worldwide. This whole, lockdown is based on positive PCR tests, but actually in the diagnostic world, in PCR, you would never diagnose with just a positive or negative. You have to actually sequence what is the test measuring. And, there was 1,500 PCR tests were sequenced in October 2020, and all of them were influenza A and B. Not one were SARS-CoV-2. So the legislation of all the lockdown and the so-called pandemic and public health emergency is based on the causative agent of COVID-19 being a coronavirus. So what I am personally doing is going to sequence PCR from informed consent from people in Ireland and the UK. If those sequences are not SARS-CoV-2, which would be, I think, a biological impossibility in January 2021, that then we can say to the governments, and I am intending to take an injunction in Ireland to the High Court, if the sequences come back as influenza, that the government cannot be reporting cases as COVID-19 or coronavirus. They have to be influenza. And the medical doctors cannot be putting causes of death because they are required to treat people based on whatever the causative agent is, and they can be struck off, but also they can be sued under medical negligence by people who have false diagnosis. But the other thing that I am going to initiate is for people who are quarantined, like if you can't return to Canada, or if in Canada they are using these tests and they are false, that people can then sue the ministers and prime ministers and the diagnostic companies and anyone administering the test. And the reason is that the ministers and prime ministers are spending citizens or people's money, and that is under procurement, and there are commercial, contracts. And if they should be testing whether these tests are testing for SARS-CoV-2 or something else, if they are spending money and the tests are not detecting the causative agent, SARS-CoV-2, then they are engaging in fraud, and that is malfeasance in public office, which is a crime in Canada, Ireland, UK, America, 5 to 10 years. But the Prime Minister personally can be sued because that's malfeasance in public office. So any indemnity they may have had does not apply if they have not done their duty of care to check that the testing was correct. So the way to actually bring down the lockdown is to actually sue personally the person that is requiring you to do the test, the manufacturer of the test, the hospital and the doctor, and the advisory committees individually, and the ministers and prime ministers, right? And so we will be launching, we might take a number of precedence cases, but we will be, and I was on 3 Zoom calls yesterday with about 50 countries, telling them that every country should be launching the sequencing of the PCR tests themselves. And we will be spearheading it, obviously, and I will be. But this will actually stop the lockdown worldwide, right? Because all of the legislation is based on SARS-CoV-2. If that is not the product of the test, or if we have heard from whistleblowers in America that they detected SARS-CoV-2 in the buffer of the PCR test. So that would, of course, be, potentially commercial fraud, diagnostic fraud. But individual people can sue the doctors, and the way to target it is to sue them individually or their insurance.
I think none of this will end until some of the people involved in this chain of command, just following orders, start to feel the personal legal effects of the actions that they're taking.